survivors, and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 94 of the show, and in this edition we're racing through Rockfort Island with our arms outstretched in the first-person arcade shooter Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. My name is Sai, and joining me on the panel this week, picking up all of Survivor 2's Chaos Emeralds and going Super Steve on your ass, it's Fire Button Steve Valance.
Yes! Oh, hi everybody.
Waking up from this podcast to discover it was all a dream and having to do it again and again and again. It's Michael Burgertime early.
I can't believe I've done this.
And missing from the pod for a while now because he picked up a snack whilst he had the microphone equipped and the microphone just outright disappeared. It's Cereal Box 64, Jordan Sugru.
It's all true. That's not a lie at all.
Every episode of First Aid Spray is recorded live on Discord, so join our server now to become part of our fantastic community that includes Resident Evil diehards and newbies. If you'd like, you can support the show via our merchandise store or over at patreon.com/FASprayPod for as little as $1 a month. All of this and all of our social media links can be found at our website, faspraypod.com. Mind a bit of housekeeping that is worth noting at the top of the show. If you are someone who listens to various podcasts and supports people on Patreon particularly, you're probably aware of this, but I thought it prudent to at least mention it. If you are supporting people through Patreon or thinking of supporting people through Patreon and you use an iPhone, please do not use the Patreon app moving forward. This doesn't necessarily apply to existing Patreons, but if you're putting a Patreon down on anything, the Apple app takes 30% of the cut and gives it to Apple, rather than the people you're giving it to. This includes us, but just broadly. This is just a broad public service announcement. Don't use the app for Apple if you can help it, because yes, unfortunately, the creators will get less of your money and Apple will take it instead. So please use the web app, the web browser, whatever you got on your Apple product. Not the Apple app, the Apple Store app. Worth just putting out there. As I say, I don't think this should affect any of the existing patrons and what you've already sort of set up with Patreon. But if you're returning to Patreon or you're thinking about supporting us or anyone else, just something to keep in mind. That's it from us. Steve, take us into the Resident Evil headlines.
Oh, it's going to be a fun one. Resident Evil RE versus servers are going to shut down on June 29th.
Kelsey made a fantastic suggestion that we do a second of silence for every current player of REverse, just to cap off how every time we mention the game, we look up how many people are playing, and it has jumped to 21 seconds. So we won't be doing 21 seconds of silence, because that's too much for a podcast. But yeah, I mean, what an appropriate episode it is to talk about the end of Resident Evil, its latest multiplayer monstrosity that was Resident Evil REverse. Steve, what's your reaction to this?
I mean, there are things that REverse does that I can kind of glimpse of enjoyment and the idea, the nugget of going through Resident Evil's history and playing as different characters and monsters and fighting each other. All sounds great on paper. But then you've got 3 maps, 14 million goggle characters, and then one mode. 5 versus 5, or is it a free-for-all? Either way, it's a sad whelp. It's a wet fart of a game that's now going to go out. And yet still, it may well be the best game we talk about on the podcast today. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Yeah, certainly up for debate. Yes, the jump in player number is definitely down to people seeing it off, but as I've mentioned, we often talk about the player number and how quickly it dropped off and how it never really ever jumped back up when the game did have its minimal updates, and it sat around on Steam, I think you were very lucky to get a match that many people kind of playing the game sort of situation. We'll probably join that small group at some point and play some games, I think, to see it off. We talked about it when we reviewed the game, that we wanted to sort of cover REverse as a weird oddity, kind of fun celebration of the series, turn your brain off, shoot some friends and watch them turn into monsters. The concept was there. It would have been cool to cover it, but our interest in the game dropped off immediately when it released after a year and a half of delay, let's not forget, and was just a massive clanger. Bergs, final thoughts, I guess, on Resident Evil REverse, the end of the era?
I recall a day that we played that game collectively for a few hours, and it was the only time I played the game, and it was a great time. And that is all I have to say about Reverse.
Yeah, I remember the experience. I don't remember the game.
It was a great time. I had a great time doing that with y'all. That was such a cool. But we could be playing literally any game, and I would be having a great time with y'all.
Yeah, think about how much more fun we'd have if we were playing something that was actually good. Jordan, any thoughts on RE-verse? Rest in peace, RE-verse.
Yeah, it's obviously, it kind of got immediately relegated to that little corner that Resident Evil has, which is sort of that, I guess it could work, but it's not really going to be remembered a great deal. I mean, we've got a game coming up today, which is, another one of those kind of middling entries that people don't necessarily remember or even necessarily played. But this is even worse because it's an online experience. You really are narrowing exactly who could have experienced this and whether or not it was actually going to have any meaningful impact. My first thought when I actually saw that it was officially shutting down was, please correct me, but does this mean that Umbrella Corps is technically outliving it? Are there still servers for that?
Yep, Umbrella Corps and Operation Raccoon City.
Wow. I mean, for Operation Raccoon City, there's still maybe a little bit of merit, but Umbrella Corps, that's the Martin from The Simpsons of Resident Evil games. It's like, wow, it's getting the last laugh.
I mean, you say that about Operation Raccoon City, but that game is 13 years old. RE-verse, 3 years old or whatever at this point now? Maybe not even 3 years old. To have those servers turned off so quickly is kind of a shame in that sense. And we talk about preservation a lot on the show at this point because there are so many Resident Evil games, again, like the one we're about to talk about today, that have not been ported forward at all. And this is a rare case, but not the first of its kind. Mercenaries 3D for the 3DS as well had its servers turned off. That at least had offline modes that you could play. RE-verse definitely in a league of its own in terms of Resident Evil games. I think that will just vanish completely from existence once this goes off, which is a shame in that when you look at it from that perspective. But I mean, will anyone actually miss it? I don't think so.
No. For what it's worth, I don't feel too bad about it and the fact that it's going away because, quite frankly, it's just another chapter in sort of Capcom's insistence on always making something Resident Evil, whether it's good or bad. And they've had an incredible last decade of incredible releases. But every now and then they do kind of throw out a bit of an eyebrow raiser of a product and it kind of comes and goes and there's no real kind of consequence to it. So it's kind of like, it's a shame that it sort of had an idea, but quite frankly, give it another 10 years, Capcom will probably come up with something similar to RE-verse, repackage something, and it'll be pushed out again, and maybe it'll work that time. They kind of just always seem to find a way to throw something out there. I mean, it was sort of a bit of an afterthought of a product as it sort of came out. For people who did actually enjoy it, I'm glad that they did. But it's one of those things where you feel like it won't be that long before we get another similar tier of Resident Evil to enjoy or not enjoy.
Yeah, and if nothing else, I look forward in a few years for people to be, beginning the sort of rose-tinted posting about this game that's going to happen. People are like, remember RE-verse? Remember when we could do this online together? And it's like, no.
You'll never be able to play the greatest Resident Evil experience ever again.
Exactly. There's going to be, I'm waiting for that first remember what they took from you post to go out. Any day now.
So our second story. Dead by Daylight's Resident Evil content is being added to its own 2 versus 8 mode.
I thought this was incredibly appropriate timing and just worth throwing in here. We won't probably get too deep into this, but we said it way back when we covered RE-verse the first time, I think, and we've said it every time since. How is it that something like Dead by Daylight, probably being the most shining of examples, other people handle the Resident Evil property better than Capcom do when it comes to this kind of realm? Yes, for those of you who aren't necessarily aware of what this is but are curious, Dead by Daylight is obviously the big 4v1 asymmetrical game. Still to this day, really, or you'd argue in terms of the player base and the devotion of that player base, perhaps. There's been a lot of games that come and go, but Dead by Daylight sticks around and continues to add cool stuff to its roster all the time. And 2v8 is one of those things. It's a mode that's been added to the game, which, yes, basically makes it just a bigger version where you can have two monster sort of characters facing off against 8 survivors. And it's a different game mode. So what is a part of the 2 versus 8 sort of online server is different, and the Resident Evil stuff that they've had before, all the stuff that you've seen before, is being added to it. I thought it was particularly interesting to mention this because in the Dead by Daylight news post on this, they literally said, think about this, a game of 2v8 can now feature the Nemesis and Wesker teaming up against Leon, Jill, Chris, Rebecca, Ada Wong, Carlos, Sheva, and then Claire, which is like, yeah, that's probably what RE-verse should have been, really, isn't it? But we didn't even get some of those characters. The RPD is also being thrown in as a map for the mode as well. And I think there is... Well, no, I won't say that because that may or may not be data mined. But go on.
So I want to comment about that. It's like we actually had the asymmetric Resident Evil game.
We did.
Resident Evil Resistance, yeah.
And the servers for that are still on, but the updates for it don't exist. They also jumped off that ship pretty quickly. Bergs, any thoughts on the DBD stuff and just how it relates, I guess, to the treatment of Resident Evil multiplayer?
I think that it's cool. Like, I was watching a friend play it last night. Seeing Nemesis and Wesker together on a map is really, really fun. Seeing honestly, the thing that I was most excited about is one of the other killers in that game actually has a Birkin skin.
Yes, there's a Birkin skin, yeah.
And there's a whole one as well.
DBD characters.
Yeah, seeing the Birkin skin on a character was really cool. Actually, I was feeling cheeky, and I threw $10 at my friend. And I was like, "Go buy the Birkin skin. I want to see Birkin run around." So I think it's cool. I mean, watching a lot of people like pull out that content. It's been in the game for a couple of years now, and seeing people like pull it out for this cool event. And my favorite map in that whole game has been the RPD since it came out. Not biased or anything. But I just think that it's one of the best maps they've created. I do. I really do. Except for the game we're going to talk about today, actually.
Steve, any thoughts on this DBD update?
When you're reading off the character roster site, it kind of made me wonder, is that a bigger representation of characters than RE-verse? Like, excluding faceless goggle mask people. Oh my God. You got Chris, Sheva, Rebecca, Jill, Claire, Leon... Sherry there? Did Sherry make the cut? Or no, her father did.
Sherry doesn't make the cut. It's the main 4: Rebecca, Ada, Carlos, and Sheva that they've mentioned. Ada was in RE-verse, obviously, and Hunk was in RE-verse, but as has been mentioned, there is a Hunk costume as well. So yes, this is more characters than RE-verse had in terms of actual characters, not goggle-wearing goons.
Like, I know they have a very hard-to-please fan base. I think it's BHD or whoever makes it.
Well, BHVR, behaviour.
BHVR. And so hats off to them. If they can't please their own fan base, they're pleasing the Capcom fan base. It's frustrating because, like you said, I've played Dead by Daylight, I've played RE-verse, and I've definitely still, with my full chest say I will probably prefer rounds of Resistance with the boys, hand gestures and everything, ganging up on that. And the fact that game didn't get cross-play or anywhere near the support as like all these other Capcom titles genuinely makes me sad. But I'm happy for the DBD people. I know they're going to get really complaining about perks and then say this is broken or that is broken, but hey, 2v8s are meant to be fun anyway, so...
Yeah, I think that's part of it, right? This is the even more chaotic version.
10 players.
Yeah. But that cues us up nicely then to talk about today's main subject, which is Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. And now, reading the file Inspection Reports from Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica, Sammy Rowett, who you can follow on Blue Sky at Sam Rowett Games.
Here is a brief report of what we have found so far. Our undercover agents have yet to crack the identity of the spy working for HCF. However, based on the D-files attained in Geneva, we are certain he is on Rockfort Island and has gained full access to all areas of personnel. Our men have been on the case for 3 months now, and I assure you this matter will be dealt with swiftly and quietly once we have identified our target. Our sources inform us that he has joined forces with our enemy, plotting some sort of offensive attack. Few details are known at this time, but we do know that they have succeeded in duplicating the prototype. Given the new urgency of this situation, I have taken the liberty of sending you a special gift. Nemesis Type T, the latest BOW, was created in the States and has set the world on fire with its performance in Raccoon City. Since everything about it is completely confidential, including its budget and inventory controls, there will be no shipping record. The package is hidden in, amongst other materials, in a routine shipment. All evidence of this transaction must be destroyed with the utmost discretion, and any knowledge of it will die with you and me. P.S. Nemesis T is programmed to set loose once an emergency is detected. There is no other way to activate it. Regard it as a talisman and use only as your last resort.
So the year 2000 marks 25 years of Resident Evil Code Veronica as of February 3rd. 25 years of that game. We've unfortunately missed the date to celebrate it exactly, as we sometimes do. So let's just miss the original game as well. Let's celebrate 25 years of Code Veronica by looking at its kind of bizarre spin-off in Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. The story goes, apparently, that Capcom thought about doing a Resident Evil arcade title as far back as 1998, which I didn't know this until I looked this up, but that's whether that project led to what we're about to talk about today, or if it kind of wandered off a cliff and came back again, because it wasn't until 2001 that the company signed a deal or announced a deal with Namco for what would originally be Biohazard Fire Zone, an arcade cabinet for Japan, and which would later come to Europe as well. As it took shape, the game became an adaptation of Code Veronica, which was quite new at the time, and all those assets were available, so of course made it much easier. And they changed the title to tie it to the original Gun Survivor game for the PS1, so it was Biohazard Gun Survivor 2 Code Veronica. It released in arcades in July of 2001, and then a PS2 port came on the 8th of November 2001 for Japan and the 8th of February 2002 for Europe. So when you look at the sort of dates there, I do find that very interesting. 2001, this came to arcades and the PS2 in Japan. Resident Evil Gaiden, also 2001. 2001, Gaiden Survivor 2. Hell of a year for Resident Evil. Probably, kind of alluded to earlier, it lives in a weird space in Resident Evil. It might well be, this is conjecture, but the most under-discussed Resident Evil game of all time. When you look it up, there's not a lot of content out there about the game. Not a lot of people talk about it, and I imagine many people have never played it. One contributing factor to that, of course, is the fact that it never released in America, which is still the case, which is very much an oddity, especially for a series like Resident Evil, which has always been even designed for Western audiences over Japanese audiences a fair amount of the time. In terms of the release, we obviously don't have any review numbers because it's such a small release and such a strange release. But an interesting factoid that I just grabbed off of Wikipedia, of all places, the Game Machine publication listed Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica on their August 2002 issue as being the most successful dedicated arcade game of the month in Japan, which is really weird to me. Because that is not only over a year since the arcade machine came out, so it wasn't like the brand new thing, but also 9 months after the PS2 port came out. Some reason, a random month, it became the most successful arcade game in Japan, apparently. But there you go. Strange thing. I'm interested to know if anyone ever saw this in the wild or played it. My guess is going to be no. Jordan, welcome back to the show. What's your sort of previous knowledge of Survivor 2 if you've never played it before? Because I think of you and I sort of having a bit of a crossover in the terms of gaming history and nerdery and sort of liking these weird oddities. Do you remember finding out about this game if you've never played it before?
I was sort of very, very vaguely aware of the Gun Survivor games, and especially so Gun Survivor 2. I had actually played a bit of Gun Survivor 1 back in uni, and it was kind of a case of, hanging out with, like-minded individuals who have Resident Evil games, and they happened to have Survivor, and they're like, you want to play it? I was like, yeah, sure. I didn't even know what it is. So, it's a first-person Resident Evil game. What? Never heard of this. And I gave it a try, and obviously after about 5 minutes it was a bit sober, and it was like, it's not quite there in terms of sort of how to control it and that. But that was the extent, playing its technical predecessor. But my extent of sort of knowing about Survivor 2 was its box art. When I would go into Game or Game Station back in the day, when it was probably around the time that it came out, so like 12 or 13, the box art always stuck out to me because it's just a big zombie head. So it does have a certain shelf presence that interested me back then. And I remember sort of like reading on the back that it had GunCon support, and I was like, okay, that's really interesting. But that's it. Like, I would have that so many times where it was a case that like I would see a Resident Evil game on the shelf that I didn't recognize as sort of the main line, something like Outbreak as another example, and it would just intrigue me. It's like, what is with this series? Like, some of its spin-offs are really ambitious, but I almost hear nobody talking about them, or really people having them in their sort of collections. And so that was it. I really didn't know anything about it. And actually trying to look up anything about it has been very hard, as you say. Like, I had a look on YouTube. Apart from people covering it for the PlayStation 2, there's really not a lot of, solid information about the actual arcade experience. There are people who have machines, but it's kind of a bit of a unique machine. And, with every bit of arcade hardware, once it starts to break down, hopefully you have pieces to replace it with and repair it. Otherwise, it is going to be lost to time. And I think that's kind of been the case with this cabinet. I could be wrong. Please correct me if I am wrong. But apparently the actual arcade cabinet was not a light gun game. It was more like a big joystick with a gun on the top, and you shifted it around. Yeah. Which kind of just sounds like, from a hardware perspective, that's going to break down, and it sounds very unique. So, yeah, even if you did have a chance to possibly see this in the wild, there's probably not that many machines out there now, and there certainly probably wasn't that many out there back in the day either. So, PS2 is it, really, for people to have an experience with it, but even then, it's only released in sort of 2 territories.
Yeah, I think you've summed up quite nicely in terms of the arcade machine. It was like a 2-screen machine with 2, joysticks essentially, with like Uzis on the top of them. I imagine there was a trigger button where there should be, but essentially it functioned more like a joystick, presumably, because the game is not an on-rails shooter like a House of the Dead or an Umbrella Chronicles, for a more close-to-home example. It is more like the original Survivor in that you are walking around and aiming and shooting. So, a very strange one indeed. And also very funny to hear you point out the box art, of course, because this podcast long awaited since we talked about the box arts of Resident Evil way back at the beginning of the show, and more specifically when we did the Tier Death Experience episode. And I think it was you and Kelsey that were really high on this box art, and I just could not stand for it. It's a weird one for me because I always thought that I owned this. I feel like I did own this at one point, and maybe I lost it. But I don't know. The point is, I never really played it. And I'm not sure I played it at all. You know what my memory's like. That's a running gag of the show at this point. But the point is, I own it now and have played it. It was the missing sort of hardware release Resident Evil game I didn't have from my shelf. So in preparation for this podcast, I was like, screw it, it's only going to get more expensive. I will buy an actual physical boxed version of this game. So I spent £80, 80 English pounds on Resident Evil Survivor 2.
Ouch.
So I guess my conclusion at the end of this episode is going to be whether or not I think it was worth that amount of money.
Wow, that's £2 a minute of experience right there.
Steve, have you played Survivor 2 before now? Do you have any memories about its release?
There was a market stall in my town way back where I lived in a humble place, nondescript, really terrible in England, East Midlands. So, yeah, and it would crop up on there very often for very, very, very low prices. And the main reason I didn't pick it up at the time is because, £2 for a Resident Evil game sounds reasonable. It's got Code Veronica written on it, which at the time was not the easiest sell for me. It almost pushed me off the franchise for a while. That title did. I've got more positive in the future, in present era, present day. But back then, that was a cursed name. And then being told it requires a gun, a gun con, a light gun to play, kind of put me off it. So the low price tag of about £2, Jesus Christ, I distinctly remember seeing it really, really cheap. And you telling me £80?
You should have bought it, Steve.
Yeah. I'd be rolling in it. But no, I knew of its existence, but it was one of those that I could just I can skip this. I don't need another retelling of that game that I'm not really keen on at this present moment in time. I have enough Steve Burnside in my life.
And Bergs, do you have any previous experience with this game? My assumption is obviously going to be no, because as I say, this never came out in America.
How have you know, madam, that you are in fact correct? No, I've never played this game prior to the day before yesterday. I didn't even...
Right.
I wouldn't even have guessed that it was real if not for the fact that I do this show and hate the series so much. It's a joke, but I really do love Resident Evil. But no, I hadn't heard about it. I played it for about 6 hours over the past 48.
Goodness.
That's how many hours are in 2 days. Well, I wanted to make sure I was being thorough. So, but no, I hadn't played it prior to this.
Okay. Well, okay, in that case, let's talk about the game. And I think the way we're going to do this is sort of break it up into... There are 3 sort of main different modes. And the first one is obviously the arcade mode. So we'll talk about that first, and then we'll sort of get into individual things and talk about the other modes later. So in terms of playing it for 6 hours, I guess from that overview, it sounds like, yeah, I could see you putting 6 hours into this. But when you actually play the game, I'm amazed that you put 6 hours into this, to be quite honest. So let's talk about arcade mode, which, yes, is a retelling of Code Veronica, as previously stated. Well, it's a partial retelling. It feels like a partial of a partial retelling. It is a dream. Spoiler for the end of Survivor 2, which is 5 missions long. And at the end of that, you wake up as Claire on the plane in the middle of the game as you head towards the Arctic. So the first, but the whole game is the first sort of third of Code Veronica, basically, from you getting off Rockfort, heading towards the Antarctic. And it is a retelling of those events with... Yeah, it's Survivor style. You're moving around locations, going from door to door, shooting enemies. But being that this is an arcade game, there are various factors in it that change the gameplay. The original Survivor is at least somewhat closer to Resident Evil's a bit more methodical pace and a bit more, I guess, exploration-based. Whereas this one, it's an arcade game. So it is about getting a key and heading towards a door to escape each mission. So you're just running to the key, which is in a certain room shown on the map, and then running to a certain door to get out, at which point you fight a boss fight. It's pretty much the extent of the complexity. One of the maps has you collect 2 keys. There is a collectible, again, alluded to earlier, Chaos Emerald-like object in each map, and getting all of these will get you the final boss fight. But let's talk about the way that it plays, I guess, now I've given it a broad overview, because I imagine a lot of people listening to this haven't played it before, so have no idea and probably need that kind of information. But Steve, how do you find the actual playing of Survivor 2?
Odd. I, as a veteran of the old first-person shooters, including the ancient ones played with keyboard, I didn't... to actually control it, it felt like I wasn't playing a Resident Evil game, because the layout for the controller version, which is the version I had to play, the shoulder buttons strafe, which put in my mind that am I playing a mech game? You know, like the weirdness of the way it controls. Generally speaking, though, it's okay. Like, is that fair to say? Like the 2 characters, their uniqueness is that the weapons they pick are themed on what they get in their respective bits.
Yeah.
Claire is broken because you can just basically turn her pistol into a burst fire, and if you don't hold the burst but just keep tapping, you pretty much just have a continuous stream of bullets and everything dies. It's pretty busted. I love it for that. But yeah, no, you have infinite ammo and you just move from place, grab power up, move on, keep moving. You can only carry 1 weapon with you in arcade mode other than your standard weapons. So you can make the mistake of, oh, I see a magnum there, and a machine gun, and a shotgun, and then just overwrite all of your weapons to where you're just left with one thing with sod all ammo, and then you have to face a boss. But honestly, in a vacuum, I'm trying to be generous, folks, right? Because like, if I don't look at this in a vacuum, it's but but when I think of it as an arcade cabinet game, the roaming around and picking up items, picking up power-ups, and deciding how you play, it's fairly reasonable as an experience. Doesn't hold a candle to House of the Dead, a much better zombie killing light gun game, but this has the player agency in moving around and a co-op feature with an AI robot partner who's thick as bricks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to try and also be generous where I can, but largely going to struggle. I will say what's great about the broken AI of the partner character, because this game, as sort of said, there's co-op in the arcade. Not the case with the PlayStation 2 version. So you have AI, which I think you can unlock like a higher level of intelligence the more you play the game and make them smarter, which is bizarre, but as it stands and the default mode, what's great about them is that they basically just get in the way of bosses sometimes. So they just soak up a bunch of damage for you while you stand in the back and just, empty your never-ending bullet hose handgun into things and your 3 shotgun shells, as Steve said, or whatever, because all the special weapons that aren't the handgun, very little ammo in them. You can stack that ammo if you continue to pick up the same gun, but if you accidentally pick up a new gun, like a machine gun, then the shotgun is just gone and you just have that instead, which is a terrible mechanic and makes even less sense when we get to a future gameplay mode that is not like that at all. Very strange. I guess it makes sense because arcade game, and you usually the case, you pick up a special weapon, just use it and drop it. But the fact that they disappear in seconds because they've got no ammo in them is bizarre. And on top of that, the game scores you. Obviously, it ranks you on every level. There's a ranking system, and you get points for how quick you are. If you took no damage, you get bonus points if you only use the handgun. So you are massively incentivized not to use the special weapons anyway. And in fact, you're massively incentivized, Jesus, words, to just basically just run past everything. Like, there's a bunch of rooms that you can explore in each location that just have enemies in and nothing else. Once you know where that Chaos Emerald is, if you're going for the extra final boss, you just run there, and then you run to the key, and then you run out and fight as few things as possible, conserve your health, and you will score higher than actually being thorough, which is what I did the first couple of times. I was like, hang on. Not that it matters. I don't think you get anything for scoring anyway, but if you do care about that, it's a bizarre mechanic to be like, you get special weapons, but don't use them and don't go in these rooms. I've got so much to get into, but I don't want to just sit here and go. So, Jordan, how did you feel about the basics of Survival 2's arcade mode?
I'll use this segment to also talk about the controls. And it's
please do, yeah.
It's such a weird thing to sort of jump into when you just go with the default controls. And I was using the controller, which I think most people use the controller when they try and play this game. I did actually switch the profile to Type E in the settings, and that kind of gives you something that is a little bit more rational in terms of sort of like what we're used to in terms of first-person shooter controls. Your right stick can now turn your character, and you strafe with the left stick, and you have triggers on your trigger buttons or the trigger for your gun, so it makes a lot more sense. I thought that it was going to be quite hamstrung, since it wasn't really intended for a controller. But I did have a look. We talk about like how impossible it is to find almost anything about this game online. Finding its manual was seemingly impossible for me, but thankfully the game itself does have controller settings in obviously the game itself, and you can see what the GunCon controls would be. And even with the GunCon 2, which I think had some extra buttons, like, it looks really awkward. I would not say it was the superior choice, because basically almost all of your movement is done on the D-pad, but there's also 2 side buttons which also have important functions. You're going to be using every button plus the trigger, plus moving your gun around, plus shooting it off screen, And I was just thinking about it, and it's like you're going to have both hands on the gun con, pointing at the screen, crouching over, and still then you're going to have to manually shoot everything. I think the reason that this game is even playable is because it has a very generous auto-aim for controller play.
Yes.
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, it ends up kind of feeling like a sort of like old school Doom in a way. And so he's just kind of run through, gone away, and in that way, it was kind of fun. Dare I say? Like it was like actually, you know what? I don't actually mind this. So that worked. But it is just, I don't know. It's very awkward. It's one of those concepts that's kind of maybe come out at a time when there's not the appropriate control scheme for it. First-person shooters not quite standardized on consoles at that point. Halo would have been brand new, and you only really had like a few other titles before that. GoldenEye is obviously one of them. I was thinking about it, and I was originally going to actually try and experiment with the emulator that I was using to try and see if I could get a Wiimote to work with it. It turns out that Wiimotes don't necessarily work that great with anything besides Dolphin, but it did make me think that despite the fact that this game feels very antiquated, in another way, it almost feels a bit ahead of its time, because I was just thinking how much better this would have been of an experience if it was a Wiimote and nunchuck control scheme. Because it would just feel more natural. You'd be able to do that accuracy with your shots. There'd be able to be a greater deal of design go into it and the environments, and you'd be able to have more exploration. You could have a full-fledged campaign, because a lot of those first-person shooters that ended up on the Wii were a little bit more fledged than just simply being a light gun shooter that you walk around in. So it was just kind of weird to think about that in retrospect. But as far as the actual campaign, it's very obviously a arcade campaign repackaged for console. And so even though there's environments there, even though you can do a bit of exploration, you really don't feel like you're being rewarded for it. I mean, there are just some rooms where there's nothing. It's just set dressing, and it's not very good set dressing, unfortunately. So I wasn't really sort of keen on going back to go and explore the extras. I did go and get the Chaos Emeralds, because why not? It doesn't take that much to do. But yeah, it was odd. The difficulty is a bit all over the place. Like, because the auto aim is very generous, it kind of almost makes it a cakewalk, and you could probably nail it down without even barely being hit at all during a campaign once you've done a couple of runs. But I always feel that there was like a few cheap hits, because the camera is constantly working against you. Anytime that there is a zombie within your vicinity, it thinks that it's going to help you by having this sort of slightly overhead view, maybe showing a zombie on the floor or a zombie that's behind you. It doesn't. It just adds to the awkwardness. And there's a lot of rooms where it's very cramped. So anytime you try and sort of burst in, you're immediately being attacked, usually by a zombie that's been posted right next to the door you're coming through. Yep. What are you supposed to do? You're not going to be able to dodge it, so you're definitely going to take the hit. And I just thought, this is like even in a light gun game, the idea is that you have the enemies in front of you, and it's about you obviously choosing how to take them out in sequence. And this is just kind of like, but what if you just had a room full of zombies in a very, very cramped, almost closet-sized room, and see if you can shoot everything from close range. Just very, very awkward. I mean, I had enough fun with it, but at the same time, I'd be very disappointed if this was the game that I bought full price back then. Especially if I bought a gun con for it, because it just doesn't sound like it would be worth it. It's not very good at all. The only other thing I can say is that the AI partners are very strange. I don't even know if the unlockable sort of intelligence is necessarily intelligence, or if it's just additional firepower. But the AI partners they're not helpful at all. They are on two ends of a spectrum. They are either John Rambo, and they're like hand-feeding pistols to Nosferatu like a baby bird, or they are basically a goldfish that does nothing. There's no in-between. Like, the amount of times that I'm actually doing all of the work, and you've got Steve that's just sort of like folding his arms, looking all cool in the corner. It's just kind of like, brother, help. it was frustrating because it kind of seemed cool to have an AI partner in a Resident Evil game, sort of, from that far back, and
totally.
it doesn't quite work that way. But sometimes they're very good.
To build on the GunCon thing, and I might have said this before in the original Survivor podcast, so I apologise if I am repeating myself, but I did play the original Survivor at least once with a GunCon, and it was awkward AF. And then having played it with a controller some years later, I was like, oh, this is far superior. It's just so much more comfortable. Even though it's not designed for the controller and it is still its own kind of breed of awkward, the GunCon, as you said, is kind of a mess for this sort of game. It totally works for what it's designed for a good amount of the time, but Capcom's strange insistence with Survivor 1 and 2, and I can't speak for 3, I don't know how that works, but having this like a move and shoot thing, didn't really work out in terms of the home experience. And having that GunCon, and obviously Survivor 1, we didn't even have the GunCon connectivity. So this little sub-series is kind of cursed when it comes to America. There's a bunch of stuff there. Like, absolutely, the cheap enemy placement is just so painfully like, yep, remember this is an arcade game, not a home experience, where there's a very noticeable one really early on where I think it's in the second map where you open the door to the military facility and a dog just like jumps straight at your face.
Yeah.
There is tiny rooms that have 3 zombies in just between you and the door. And I know the layouts of all these maps are just the Code Veronica map. Like it is just the Code Veronica map with the assets, the sizing of rooms. I don't know if it's the same or not. Quite possibly, but either way, from the just walking around, someone should have figured out, well, no, they didn't care, did they? It's not about trying to make it comfortable. It's trying to make it hard. So yes, tiny rooms with enemies directly between you and the next door, and it is just about getting to that door to move onwards. But there you go. And yeah, oh my God, the whole idea of there's an enemy behind you, it's not really a first-person game. I mean, it's meant to be, but it's not really true first-person, because when you have that experience of an enemy behind you, you realise that the camera is actually just in front of the character's face rather than directly on their shoulders, because it does pull up and kind of try and give you a shot of what's behind you at the same time, like from a bird's eye view of your character down. Does not work at all. Like, not only, if you mean it, great, if you can see the enemy behind you, that's great, I guess. It doesn't mean you can do anything about it. You're not suddenly able to do anything different that you wouldn't be otherwise. There's no quick turn or anything like that. So it's more just alerting to you that you're in danger, which you should be aware of anyway, because it's a run and gunner kind of experience. But on top of that, now you can't do anything about what's in front of you, because you can't see in front of you either. That whole thing is a complete mess. I don't know what they were thinking with that. It's very strange. Maybe it worked from an arcade perspective, but I still don't think so. Like panning the camera up like that and suddenly not being able to pick out anything that's anything less than a few inches in front of your face is just strange. Bergs, how do you feel about the basic gameplay of Survivor 2?
I mean, not much that hasn't already been said. As I said, I've never played this video game before, and notably, long-term hater of the Resident Evil series, which I is an affectation I take with love. In this instance, I actively hate this game. And I say this as a human who owns... I owned a GunCon 2. Time Crisis and the Time Crisis series was like... That was the arcade game that I went and played. I love light gun games. I think they're a lot of fun. I think that, there's, especially once they started doing them in co-op, because it was something that you could play with a friend and getting as far as you could. And, there's, excitement building. And then this was just boring.
Yeah.
It frustrated, the camera frustrated me to no end. In a different mode that I think we'll get into later, it's a little helpful because that mode's a little slower pace. But in this arcade mode where you've got 3 minutes to get to 2 keys, and then there's no way to pull up the map again. God, that drove me insane. That there's no way for me to because that's the farthest I got in the game. Was I got to the level where you needed to collect 2 keys, and I would get to the second key, and then couldn't find the door that I was gonna had to go to, and there's no way to pull up the map again because it shows you go downstairs and then there's a room, but it doesn't appear the actual biohazard symbol that at that point, at every other point in the game prior to that, appears on the map where you're supposed to be going. Didn't appear on the map, and I don't know if there was a second stairway that I couldn't find that could go down, but that was frustrating to no end. It did turn out to be, you take a hit here, you take a hit there, to get through it. I rather liked I liked Steve having him around because he sometimes would take out hunters in one shot.
Yeah.
Earlier, Jordan said Nosferatu. Are those the stretchy arm guys?
Yeah, no, that's Bandersnatch.
Okay. So the other thing I noted too was, they say they give you a timer for when Nemesis appears, and then I don't know if any of you all got to that point where Nemesis did appear. He does. He is the PlayStation 1 asset, very clearly the PlayStation 1 asset, which is cool to see in another video game. I trying to think through it. I appreciate how each character had their own suite of weapons too. Like that, at the very least, was kind of cool because I played through the arcade game 3 times to try to get past that part, and so the third time I was like, all right, I'll pick Steve because if he's got double the fire rate, at the very least, I can afford to kill more things, which ended up being good and accurate and the right call to make. But he also doesn't get the Magnum; he gets the grenade launcher. He also doesn't get the machine gun, he gets Uzis, which is pretty cool. I don't recall if he gets the shotgun. I think he does, because the shotgun's the only one that when you see it spinning, I think it's by itself, and the other two have 2 different weapons next to it. All in all, of the game modes, the arcade game mode was my least favorite. And I say that let me rephrase that statement and say it's the one I liked the least out of the ones that were offered, because it, after the 3 times I get to it, I get to the same wall in each instance. And yeah, granted, skill issues being what they are, you can't really expect a hater to remember everything about a game. I, ultimately speaking, did not really enjoy my time with it. If I had seen this at an arcade and I put in time to it, and it's not the only game I've ever seen that has the joystick with the gun on it, because there was a Terminator 2 arcade game that had the exact same thing.
Okay. Yeah.
I would go and play something like Silent Scope, or again Time Crisis if the arcade had it instead, as opposed to this, because this would have just made me upset.
See, that's a really interesting point. A few things that you say really bring me to thinking about the fact, as coming into this as a Code Veronica fan, that map in particular is kind of a maze, and it works in the original Code Veronica because that is a slow-paced survival horror title, which is about backtracking and about unfolding and understanding the map, and absolutely looking at the map at any point. So, but coming in as someone who knew the layout, looking at the sort of mini-map, I kind of knew what it was getting at, because I know the layout of Rockfort Island very well. But I can absolutely get the confusion of it. And I did have the experience where that moment where it tells you to go get 2 keys, one of them is basically by the door. So you get that and you kind of go, oh, I'll go this way, I guess. And you get down and then you get to the door and you're like, oh, I need to go get the other key. So there is a specific order, basically, that you should get those keys in. Otherwise, you're only massively backtracking on yourself and putting yourself in more harm's way. And indeed, putting yourself in harm's way of the Nemesis, which is not something that we had talked about to this point. That is kind of, a selling point of this game, is that it does feature Nemesis, which is a very odd, very confusing, very nonsensical thing. Each mission is timed until the Nemesis drops in, and the game rather unsubtly tells you, invincible enemy. And yeah, he's just there to chase you until you either die or get the hell out. It's one of those arcade things where it wants you just to keep pace, I guess. I suppose it adds something interesting to the game, question mark. I don't know what that is exactly. What it adds to me, I'll tell you what it adds to me, is that this secret final battle against the Nemesis at the end of the game, I have no idea why it throws in the linear launcher from the end of Code Veronica, which is like, okay, it makes no sense, but sure, fine, I have that. But also when you pick it up, it has a shotgun icon. They didn't make a specific asset for the linear launcher when you to show your equipped weapon. It just shows you a shotgun, which this feels like it was thrown in at the last minute. But okay, fair enough. Very strange. Before we do move on a little bit, I guess I'll check it to the other guys for thoughts on the Nemesis. Steve, how did you feel about the inclusion of Nemi, old leather daddy?
It could literally have been anything, really. It doesn't say stars. It doesn't even have his face. His facial features don't even move, which is like one of the coolest things in classic RE3 is when his mouth goes a bit agape as he says, "Ugh," the one sound effect he has in this entire instance. Most noticeable in the fight in the room with the acid where you melt him in RE3, but he has a mouth that moves. Doesn't in this. It's just like a slate face mask and grunts at you. I don't think it's even all that intimidating when he chases you. It just slowly walks towards you. Okay, one shot at Steve. Farewell, let's move. He's not really... It's just a very obvious barrier. As for the actual inclusion of Nemesis itself, it could have been anything. It could have been the T-103. It could have been the T-002. If you want to theme it right, it should have been T-078, really.
T-78, yeah. It should have been. It's really funny you say he doesn't say stars. Of course he doesn't say stars. There's no stars in this game. So why is he here?
It's his thing, so...
I know, but it makes no sense.
I mean, that would require putting voice lines into the game as opposed to the character selects, and that's it.
Yes, well, yeah, we'll get to that. But the thing about the Nemesis that everyone points out about this game is probably one of the most notable things, I guess, about this release. If you're listening to this and you know about Survivor 2 but have never played it, is that it rather weirdly includes the Nemesis, which is made extra weird by the fact, of course, that yes, at the end of the arcade mode, this was revealed to be Claire dreaming about the experience that she's just had, I guess. Why is she dreaming about the Nemesis? She's never met it. She doesn't know it exists. People have spent like 20 years trying to like justify the canonicity of this weird dream sequence. Like why she would dream about the Nemesis. Did she find like some secret file that we didn't see kind of detailing the Nemesis? Which is ironic because there is a few files in this game that you can collect and sort of read after the fact. And it mistakenly says that Nemesis was made in the US as well, which is really funny to me because that's not true. But yeah, strange. Very clearly just like, oh, we'll put the Nemesis in there because it's iconic or whatever. And yeah, dragging and dropping across a PS1 asset. It's very funny. But also it's sort of heartwarming, I guess. Jordan, any thoughts on old Nemi Nems before we move on?
First of all, I knew that the fact that it was a PS1 model was going to get to you because I did listen to Survivor 1's episode.
The old PS1 sound effects. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's tugging at those nostalgia heartstrings.
Yes. Yes, with regards to, and I'm quoting the secret records here, the hottest thing on the planet, Nemesis. It was, again, they throw it on the pile of, I guess it could work, but of having a stalker character within this weird walking light gun game. I thought it was going to be way better than it was, because the game really hypes it up. It has that time limit, which obviously it made sense when it was an arcade game because it's all about sort of, getting through there fast. And that kind of worked for the experience because it's not a very big map on any of the levels that you go on. And so rushing causes errors, which causes difficulty spikes. And that can be obviously a very replayable experience when you're at an arcade. But it kind of felt a bit nonsensical, but they still keep the timer in for, Nemesis to show up, but they're constantly hyping it. They're like, oh, you better get moving, because, just you wait till Daddy Nemesis is back. Just you wait till he comes in. And it keeps hyping it up. It's like, he's going to be here in 3 minutes. He's going to be here in 1 minute. He's 10 seconds away. He's at Chiswick Roundabout. He's coming. Don't you worry. He's on his way. And then he shows up. And I swear I had to actually stop walking in order to turn around and actually see if he was actually going to come through the door.
Yeah.
And he finally does. But again, I mean, I had like, it doesn't even feel like you're having a fight with him. If he gets close enough to you, it's just kind of a death animation immediately, and it's like, well, what was the point? Like, I don't have to fight him, and I get it. It's like the idea of evasion, but genuinely, he doesn't bother running. I don't think ever, which was kind of the whole point of Nemesis. Was that it was like, true. oh my gosh, this guy is a running tank, and that's not obviously transferred over from the PS1 game. The one thing that kind of stands out that did make me laugh, that was worth sort of Nemesis's inclusion, is the fact that there was a point where I was running away from Nemesis. Not really, but you know, I was going in the direction that I would be running away. And I went up some stairs, and then I forgot that there was an item that I wanted down the stairs. Nemesis was still following me, but it just so happened to be that as I started to go down the stairs, he was coming up the stairs, and the game didn't care. I just passed right through him, which meant that I was able to go downstairs, get the item, and when I came back to the foot of the stairs, he was starting to come down, do the exact same thing again. And it's like, this guy's just never going to catch me. And then I went into the next room, and yeah, it was just... you know, it's like Nemesis is such a cool character, and yet every time that Nemesis has been used outside of Resident Evil 3, it's always been not even diminishing returns, serious diminishing returns. If you were a fan of Nemesis, it's one of the coolest characters. It's so deflating every time they try and use Nemesis, and it's never quite the same impact. It should be, but it just ain't. So despite the fact that it was kind of a big feature of this campaign, and it was sort of like a big gimmick, it really didn't amount to much. And yeah, like, I mean, obviously it can depend on difficulty, but actually fighting Nemesis at the end is kind of pathetic. So here you go, here is your weird nuclear shotgun. Just fire. He's just stuck in a corner. He's not going to get a blow in at all, and he didn't. And as fraudulent Nemesis, you know, I don't believe that's his real passport.
Not the real Krusty the Clown. We made fun of that before with like future Nemesis appearances. They can't get the voice right, and yeah, it's funny they didn't even try this time. Didn't even bring the voice clip across, which is very strange, I guess. Even if it would have made no sense. The Nemesis thing's really interesting because on the one hand, it is like an instant kill thing if he touches you, which I guess is like an arcade, like, instant death, better put more money in to carry on sort of thing. But it's so situational because when he drops into a map, he doesn't drop in like in the same room you are or something like that. He has a designated like landing point. Now, to be fair, I think it's really cool that each map has a unique cutscene when he appears. In the prison part of the island, he's like punching through the grate that you eventually have to open up in the original game, and he like crashes through the ceilings and other maps and stuff like that. That's really cool. But the fact that he has to have a designated landing zone means most of the time he's going to be nowhere near you. And I did exactly the same thing where I turn around and just to see him, just to be like, is that what he looks like? Okay, cool. All right, see you later then. It's very strange. Let's talk a little bit about, I've got a heading here for quote-unquote story. I mean, I think we've pretty much already covered it. It's all a dream version of Code Veronica. But I guess we can also talk about the cutscenes and stuff like this here. Bergs, what did you make of this element of the game, if you want to call it that?
It was the Resident Evil Code Veronica that, like, if you're out and you're out in the car with your mom and you're like, Mom, let's go get Resident Evil Code Veronica, and she's like, we have Code Veronica at home. This was Code Veronica at home. One of the interesting things that I thought was, like, when you're booting up the game in the like title screen and in the like menus and stuff, there are some voice lines, but they kind of go away once the game starts.
They stop there.
I don't know Code Veronica. Let me rephrase this. I don't recall Code Veronica well enough to know that if the lines that are like pasted at the bottom of the screen are actual lines from Code Veronica.
Oh no.
Okay, no, good. No. Because like that could have been something they could have done to save themselves time, energy, and effort. So in terms of the story, like it's the worst version of a story that we've seen already. And it kind of just exists and happens. There's no context for why anybody is there, or like specifically what you're doing or who the people are. Like, you wouldn't know. Let me think about this. Do they even show their names on their like character select screens?
I think they do on the character select screen because they got like ID card things.
Yeah, I think it just says ID number though.
I'm not so sure. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't pay enough attention to it, despite the fact that I've been playing.
Either way, to your credit, they don't think that. I'm not sure they actually introduced each other to each other properly. Like, I'm not sure they say their own names to each other.
So which is a trend in Resident Evil games, and I think Remake 2.
Sherwin is a fan of pointing that out, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, the characters never like say their names to each other, but. And then like you see I heard that Alexandria Ashford's the boss in it, and like who the heck is she?
Yeah.
And what's the point? Like if you're not a fan of Resident Evil, coming to this game would be absolutely frustrating, because it makes no sense. Like House of the Dead, at the very least, tells you who the characters you are fighting as. Time Crisis, exact same thing. You get like some story recap. You get some like. You get a brief underview of like, go, there's like, go, bring him back. And there's like an action sequence that, hey, this is an exciting action game. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is what we're doing. In this game, you're kind of just like thrown in there. And I even waited when I turned on the game for the first time to see if there would be like a reel of some kind, like an update to, leading up to the explosion. Heck, give us the intro cinematic to Resident Evil Code Veronica. You had the assets for
that
it.
would be great.
It's right there. And it does the exact same thing. If you end it on an explosion and Claire just like gets up at, done, happy. But whatever. I'm not that mad about it. I'm not mad about it.
Yeah, completely. Like the sort of eye catch, I guess. I mean, it's not necessarily accurate because maybe the arcade eye catch was different. But yes, what you get for the title screen is just a few like cute cutscenes of them shooting zombies in the locations that you're going to go and shoot zombies in. Doesn't provide any context, absolutely. House of the Dead, for all the things that, it's not a very well written or a very well voice acted, whatever. It's at least fun and it gives you something. You're absolutely right. This has nothing to it. There's no Alfred, there's no Wesker. Obviously, there's no Chris. Alexia does appear with zero context. Same with Nosferatu. He's just a monster in this game without the context. It is just a series of shootouts, which I guess is fair because it's an arcade game. But again, look at House of the Dead, and people remember the cutscenes more than anything. Just like zero effort in terms of this. The story in this, the sort of retelling of Code Veronica, if you want to call it a retelling, it's like if somebody retold Code Veronica who like had some sort of narcoleptic issue around cutscenes. They'd like watched or played the game being, the original game, and just completely fallen asleep during all of the dialogue and just woke up and like, oh, I'm in this location now. Okay. And then I fought some monsters and then I fell asleep again and I woke up and I was in this location. Like absolutely nothing. Boss fights are just thrown in for the sake of there being a boss fight at the end of the level with zero meaning as well. Like the spider that's in the Antarctica is just on the prison island now for some reason. Steve, what do you make of the retelling of Code Veronica?
I mean, I don't want to use the word has been written by someone who's had a lobotomy, but it's happened. It's happening. I have played many a light gun game with a paper-thin plot and a story to tell, and in this case, it is just a sequence of cutscenes you vaguely remember to get to fight bosses that shouldn't be there, to then move on to the next bit. And there's typos all over the place. For some reason, Steve's now known as Mr. Knight and Claire is just known as Sis. Like, I think they're trying to... It feels like it's been translated very badly, at least in the version we played. To try and throw any kind of thrust of a story is ridiculous. I feel like Tofu Survivor has more narrative weight than this. That's how frustrating this game is. Like, because there are people who... I remember getting into arguments on Twitter when Twitter was still Twitter and not a Nazi hive. Where people were trying to find ways to shoehorn in stuff from this actual canonical lore, and like, who cares? There is literally zero narrative relevance. Oh, there was definitely another Nemesis because there's one on Rockfort Island. Is there? in one dream where Claire clearly had too much cheese beforehand and may or may not have sniffed a crowbar. Right? What? Like, she's just walking from place to place, blasting things. Nosferatu, as you said, just appears with his sidekick Bandersnatchers. Okay, cool. But
He's like Salazar with his Verdugos. Do you remember how Nosferatu had 2 Bandersnatchers with him?
I just like the fact that Alexia is a trendsetter and famous Dark Soul boss, the Capra Demon, notorious for its annoying sidekick dog ads. She was ahead of the game in 2001
Yes.
with her horde of Cerberuses. Okay, for whatever reason. There's no kennels in the mansion. They're just like, a horde of them. You just have them all in the hall, as you do.
Sorry, Steve. I just wanted to, I'm so glad you brought that up, because when I saw that, I was like, is this meant to be a reference to the fact in RE1 when you try and open the door, a dog comes in? And then I thought, no, that would take an ounce of thought.
Yes. If we're going to have, we'll talk about dungeon mode in a bit, but if we're going to have a string of events where you shoot Resident Evil monsters in kind of a funhouse kind of affair to just move on to the point, let's do that. Raid mode works great for that. The fact that this even tries to have a quote-unquote story of just cringe lines between Claire and Steve, no. The more I talk about it, the more it pisses me off, because you don't even get really any thrust of Resident Evil Code Veronica's plot, do you? You just get they meet up as she leaves the prison complex, then they just proceed forwards until the building starts exploding because Alexia's took a nap. Okay,
basically.
Great. There's no big revelation. There's no especially oh my god, right? Compared to Survivor 1, right? Survivor 1 is like War and Peace. There's characters, there's plot, there's files, there's stuff to explain. There is none of that here. There is a vacant void.
Thank you for that, Steve. That was sensational. Yes, poorly translated for sure. The very, very quick subtitles that you get in the very, very quick cutscenes between missions, which add to nothing, where they could have added story, is just them quipping for a second. But yeah, they are poorly translated. My particular favourites were Steve saving Claire from one of the boss fights is a sweeper hunter if it was a little bit bigger, basically. And they kill it and it gets back up again, and so they shoot it again. And Steve says, if I wasn't here, you could have been cleared, which I'm not quite sure what that means. And also they say at one point, I think they're shooting Nosferatu. No, it might be the spider at the beginning. Either way, somebody says the bullet doesn't seem to be effective, which I thought was also quite funny. But my favourite typo is on the door that you inspect to leave. The biohazard door. Somebody at Umbrella wrote, leave here because it is dangerous on the biohazard doors. Which is quite endearing, really. Jordan, what did you make of...
God, sorry.
I was just saying, Jordan, what did you make of all of this?
That sign, by the way, it seems like it would be perfect for some teenager's bedroom. It's like, leave here because it's dangerous.
Radioactive, man.
It's, oh gosh, yeah. The story. First of all, I feel like I have been incredibly spoiled in comparison by Dark Side Chronicles, which we covered in episode 52. That was at least to a degree faithful. It was a pretty good summary of just about everything that happened in Code Veronica. This is just an incoherent mess in comparison. And the weird thing is, I don't know who it's for. It's very strange because it's kind of like there is not enough material actually in the game to actually tell you the story of Code Veronica. So it assumes, and it kind of makes necessary, that you've played Code Veronica. But then if you play Code Veronica and you come to this, you're just going to be insulted by the depiction of it, if you liked the game at least. I mean, that was actually the other thing that I did take from the game cover back in the day, was the fact that it had the subtitle of Code Veronica. Well, after the subtitle of Gun Survivor. And I did think it was a bit... I was aware of Code Veronica, but I did think it was a little bit sort of weird that it's also got this second game that's also called Code Veronica. And I kind of assumed that it was, what technically the game is, which is a sort of a retelling of Code Veronica, but it really isn't. Like, if you were picking this up just thinking, oh, I like first-person shooters more, but I want to check out this story, I'll just get the first-person shooter version of it rather than the actual mainline entry. It's not worth it, and it's just kind of like, if obviously this game overall seems like it was kind of a barrage of compromises and just weird circumstances that probably all come from the fact that at one point Capcom and Namco made some agreement to make something Resident Evil, and what we get is just a very awkward arcade game turned to a console title. It kind of feels like, because they were doing a lot of asset flipping from Code Veronica, that they were just like, well, I guess we'll do the story of Code Veronica, but it's like, that's a lot. It's kind of a big campaign, and especially because there's obviously all kinds of different enemies that aren't necessarily all from Code Veronica. It's like, you could have just made your own original little story. It's going to be a dream anyway, so dream bigger. Do something more fun with it. Why are we just going through a kind of a botched version of something that Claire already went through? And the reality was more interesting. It's just very strange. The cutscenes are bad. The dialogue, it's kind of a shame that there isn't voice acting, because, well, some of those lines. There's plenty of misspellings. One of my favorites is actually in the credits itself, where I think it's like third name down, so it's quite high in the list. And they credit a supervisor, and that is none other than Shinji Mikami. Without a H.
I didn't see that. That's great.
Yeah. But he wasn't a supervisor. He was a supervisor. So Shinji Mikami is now a form of eyewear. But yeah, that's about it. Like to be honest, I did start skipping the cutscenes because I was just thinking, what's the point?
Oh, absolutely.
Most of the cutscenes are like at most 15 seconds, and you somehow know less about the game for watching them. So there you go.
To build upon your point and an earlier point about me knowing Code Veronica, if I'd have played this arcade game in the wild when it was new, I absolutely would have felt kind of insulted by it. Like, why did I do this when I have Code Veronica at home? Which is far superior to this in every way. And not only does it not offer a new experience to that as well, because in Code Veronica X, which was also out by this point, which is the PS2 port, you can unlock a first-person view for the battle mode. So if you want to wander around these locations in first person and just blast monsters, you can do that in Code Veronica X, the PS2 game, which is already released. So why am I spending money in the arcade for this terrible version of it? Which, by the way, I haven't mentioned. Horrible on-screen UI. Just messy, fills up too much of the screen. Haven't mentioned that, but just hideous. And now, reading the file Diary of Chief Warden from Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica, Muzu Cthulhu, who you can follow on Blue Sky at Muzu Cthulhu.
Only few hours remain for me as a conscious human being. This will be the final entry in my diary. I won't waste precious moments whining about what could have been, who dropped the ball this time. Ah well, what's done is done. In 48 hours, the virus will contaminate this entire island and every life form will die out. She is my last hope. My invincible lover, Letitia. First met you in an empty, solitary cell. You had innocently chosen that spot to make your web, a place to call home, though there was no food for you to catch. I wonder why I fell for you. Perhaps it was because I sensed we were kindred spirits, choosing to live our lives in some sheltered corners secluded from others. I diligently kept feeding you with moths and roaches. Watching you wrap their bodies and suck at their fluids relaxed me. I noticed how you had grown, but I wanted you to be bigger and stronger. That's why I started to steal bodies for you. There was no harm in it. After all, they were the dead remnants from various experiments, no longer useful, and and left to be disposed of secretly. So I did just that, by feeding you. The effect of the virus on you was astounding, and in no time you'd become as big as a man. Then, when I ran out of food, I sent a prisoner to the cell. They'd be tortured to death by Alfred anyway. No one cared if a few went missing. At last, you have grown too big to live in a cell. Now I let you crawl loose in the prison. The ceiling has become your nesting place, and you've begun to devour prisoners and prison officers at random. No one will be able to destroy my lover. You are far more powerful than that annoying Alfred. Your fangs are sharp enough to slice his empty little head off with one bite. All those memories, they'll be gone. My whole body's been infected with the virus. Now I'm hearing the noise you make when you crawl on the ceiling with your 8 slender legs. Letitia, guess you've eaten your food up. I guess the hunger is urging you. Dear Nettie, kill everyone. Destroy everything. Devour all. The meaning of the world will be lost when I die. I know you're gazing at me with your urge. And let nature take its course as you sink your beautiful fangs into me.
Right, okay. Let's talk about the other gameplay modes then. Let's put arcade mode to bed for a little bit and talk about dungeon mode, which is a strange one. It's an affair of... I don't think it's randomly generated, but it's one of those things where it's just like, here's a bunch of rooms strung together and you have to get from one end to the other. It's a bit of a labyrinth affair. There are 3 stages to play. Each have 6 missions each, so it's a massive mode. I can't imagine that any of us have played that much. I'll be honest, I played 1 and that was enough for me. Steve, what did you make of dungeon mode?
I can appreciate the scope. I can appreciate the idea. For example, we complained about an arcade mode. You pick up weapons, you delete the previous weapon. In this, you have like a carrying capacity, so it's a bit more reflective of the traditional Resident Evil experience. Healing items are still like equip on use instant. You can't save them, but you can go backtrack. There's a much more generous time limit, and the whole point is different missions do different things. But the ones that I've played mostly, it's traverse through several layers of a place, fight a boss, you win. I can appreciate it more because there's a lot more going on. There's traps. There is a layout you can't figure out. You haven't got a map, so you have to kind of mental map it. Or it's just a shame that everything looks very the same and the environments are very boring and flat. Like, for example, the first one you have to do first. The clock tower is just nothing but red brick. It's like walking around somewhere in Dorset. It's just, it's kind of monotonely flat. They do use more of the cameo monsters, the things that weren't in Code Veronica that have somehow made it into this game, like the Licker and Drain Demos. But it's just more of the same. Like, excluding those little touches, that's all it is. It's just exploring slightly blander environments in a more complex pattern with various remixes. You can unlock 2 extra characters for these bonus modes, by the way. If you do all of the clock tower, you get Chris. And if you do all of the other one, you get Rodrigo, who's just using a knife because he's an absolute berg. If you thought that the original game was insubstantial and the cutscenes pissed you off, this may well be the only way to placate you and make it feel like you've got your money's worth because there's a lot more to do. It just happens to look very bland.
Yeah, I had an experience with this one in the sense where I was like, oh, this is something different. Like, sure, these first few rooms I'm in are all kind of boring, but it's not a Code Veronica map. It's something I've never seen before. The layouts are different. You're absolutely right. There's traps that I get. Some of those are asset reuse kind of. You've got the big crushing thing from Code Veronica, but it's used in a different way. There's like a string of them that you kind of have to get through. And obviously from first person, it feels completely different. I thought that was kind of cool. And how it used the enemies was kind of cool. And this is a bit more engaging. But then you get like 10 minutes into it and you're like, do you know what? This actually sucks. Like, the lack of a map means you just fart around until you find your way out. And the fact that it all looks the same, at least the first one, absolutely. everyone goes on about release the Clock Tower cut for Remake 3. Give them this and see what happens. You want your Clock Tower now? Yeah, I mean, that was my general. I don't know where I fall down on it overall, but my experience with it started off as, this is a bit more engaging. But then by the end of it, I just kind of wanted that one mission that I did to be over, to be honest. Jordan, what did you make of Dungeon Mode?
I had the exact same sort of like initial reaction. It's like, oh, this could be cool. I actually thought it was going to be something more along the lines of kind of just running from room to room and clearing them and just seeing it in sort of like a time attack, which it isn't really, because the sort of the time limit they give you is pretty lenient.
It's like half an hour or something, isn't it?
Yeah, and eventually it was just getting like, oh, this is actually quite boring. There just simply isn't enough sort of mileage to this game for it to really kind of go any further than this, especially because like all you're really doing is just going from room to room and shooting things, and it's not fun. You're not like changing your tactics. There's really not a whole lot you have to think about. You're not doing any real proper exploring. Everything that you need to find, you're going to find by accident anyway. There's nothing clever to it. And I know it's literally called Dungeon Mode, but nonetheless, there's just too many corridors. Like, it gets so boring. And I mean, so I wish that they were sort of procedurally generated and random maps. But I did I did the first stage and I completed that and I went right back in to start the next one and I knew it was exactly the same layout. And I was like, okay, so it's a different thing that I'm doing now. I'm collecting the Chaos Emeralds instead of going after a boss, but this is exactly the same map. And the weird thing is, I like, it's not saying that it's easy to get lost, but like it's so samey, and it really it sucks all the fun out of it. It just doesn't encourage exploration. You're just thinking, why am I really pathfinding through here to kind of just do what is exactly the same level with the same enemies and so on and so forth? Very sort of uninspiring. So the challenges are kind of all right, and if you really want to sort of like unlock the characters, then that's there for you. But this is where it became like painfully obvious that like they were just doing anything to try and flesh out this release and give it something that was not necessarily there in the arcade version. And this is what they got. I mean, I can only feel bad for the people who worked on this game because I can only imagine that they were given a very, very limited amount of time to work on it.
Literally, my thought, yeah.
Yeah, and there's just not much to say.
Johnny Capcom slapping on the box, features new modes that weren't in the arcade version, but neglecting to say that they were both made in the same day, and that's it. Just like, you got a day to make all these modes. Off you go. That's what it really feels like. Bergs, what was your experience like with Dungeon Mode? I
played it more than anything else.
Okay, cool. Well, that's good.
It's in the time. Well, I was also like chatting with like people while I was playing it, so I had like part of my brain distracted while I was like mindlessly going through. So I completed the first mission of the Clock Tower and got to the final boss of the underground level, and then died, and then went back into the second level of the Clock Tower and finished that. Which is the first level again, but the objective is to get all of the Chaos Emeralds. You do not, however, turn into Super Claire, unfortunately.
Shame.
Yeah, I had an uncle who worked at Capcom who said that that's what would happen if I did, but it really didn't. I liked it. Like, I mean, in terms of like game modes, in this, it felt the closest to a Resident Evil game. So that.
Yeah, that's fair, actually.
It was what I was expecting. I remember making a comment to a friend of mine as I was playing it this morning, actually, where he commented that he's like, God, these enemy animations are so bad. And I'm like, well, you think about the game that they came from, and when you're playing this game with tank controls, it's not as simple as, I'm just going to take a step to the right here, and this boss is going to walk right past me, because you couldn't. One of the things, especially in this mode, that I think that would have really benefited from would be a God, give me a quick turn.
Yeah.
God, if this game had a quick turn, it'd be playable. It is frustrating that I don't believe there's a way to drop a weapon once you have one.
No, you have to replace something, don't you think?
Well, you can't even pick it up. If you're full weapons,
No,
then...
you need to... Yeah, that's right. You need to, like, expend something, don't you? Yeah.
I thought that, I brought the rocket launcher thinking, for the boss, it'll be really good using the boss. And then it, like, went right over the spider's face. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not doing that again. Because you get to the end of the level and you get the crossbow and you haven't seen the crossbow yet and you want to try it. And then you can't because... you're full. And so it's like, okay, well, I guess I'm not using the crossbow ever. The other comment I'll make about dungeon mode is when you do get to try the other weapons, the grenade launcher sucks. It hits the thing and then there's like a delay and then so there's a delay and then they come out and they're so slow. So the boss of the second level is, of course, the obvious choice for a boss in this game, which is the underground worm, the worm thing.
Yes, of course.
And so I would ploop, and then it would be gone. Mm-hmm. And my grenades would just fly over where it was. And they're also it's not like the grenade launcher. It's multiple spread shot grenades too, which I'm also not a big fan of. Anyway, I'm just mincing, splitting hairs here with this. For a game mode that was made in a day, neat.
Hey, do you know what? Maybe they take more than a day because the gulp worm that's what it's called in Code Veronica, right? That's not in the arcade mode at all.
Yeah.
So they made that for the dungeon mode. I say made, obviously, yeah, it's all reused assets and reused animations, but they obviously would have had to have made sure that it at least worked a little bit. So, I guess that's cool that there is at least a unique boss fight in the dungeon mode, possibly even two. I don't know who played it all. That's the silly thing. Which I guess will appropriately take us on to our third and sort of final main mode of the game, which is Roach Mode. I have one note on this. I'm just going to get it over and done with. This is the worst thing I've ever seen. It puts you in a room. There are many rooms, actually. Like dungeon mode, there are multiple missions you can do. But each one is a room, as far as I'm aware. Or at least the first one is just a single room. And it just puts 50 cockroaches. Not oversized T-virus cockroaches, just little cockroaches walking around on the floor, on the walls, mostly the walls. And you shoot them. That's it. You shoot them until you shot them all. And they're cockroaches, so they're small. And you trying to aim and track them is stupid and infantile. So you just kind of stand there and wait for the bugs to come over your crosshair and then shoot them all. And that's it. That's it. You shoot all the roaches. That's the whole mode. And it's at this point, there is trying to fill this game up with content, and then there is this. This is the equivalent. This is worse than sort of most eShop and mobile game slop in 2025. What the hell is this? Jordan, Roach Mode.
It's very short, I'll give it that. Although it immediately infuriated me when I actually did all of the modes and it gets to the finale and you're thinking, oh, okay, I keep going from room to room and there's more roaches to shoot naturally. There's obviously going to be a big finale
roach
where I fight one giant roach.
Yeah.
No. Roach revenge. There's no giant roach there. Finale. No giant roach. What? Why? Come on, Namco. It's just scale it up. Just give me
the most
one.
Iconic Code Veronica BOW of all time as well. Let's not forget the cockroach.
Yeah.
Gets its own mode.
So it's very awkward, and it's just kind of funny as well because it gives you weapon choices. It's do you want to take out your cockroaches, with fumigation? Oh no, they wouldn't do that. No. Do you want to take your cockroaches out with a handgun, or would you like to take them out with a shotgun? All I would say is, if you are having a roach problem, do not hire Claire Redfield's pest control because your house will be more lead than brick by the time that she's done with it. I was actually, as I was playing it, I was thinking, okay, this is terrible, and I'm playing it with a controller. I've got auto aim. I really don't even have to think about what I'm doing. And I was trying to imagine somebody who was actually playing this stage with a gun con on an old tube telly back in the day. Statistically, somebody did, even if it was just a play tester. And if you're out there, I just want to say, I hope you're doing better. You deserved a much better life than this.
Bergs, did you play Roach Mode at all?
I did. I was about to say I loved Roach Mode, but I don't. I thought it was fun. I ended up finding a fun way to game it. Listen, I was talking to people at the time.
Okay, yeah, to each their own.
And it was something.
It was I was talking to God. That's why. Sorry.
I was talking to folks about like the game and about like I was trying not to talk about the podcast, but people wanted to ask about like why I was playing this terrible game. So then they were like, "Oh, you're all like, yeah, I guess." But because these are like these are Final Fantasy friends who I don't want necessarily to like Google me. So it was more entertaining to like get mad at the game as I for some reason couldn't shoot the wall at the right spot to catch the. But I was trying to see if I can get the counter as high as I could to see like what the scoring system was, because like the first level it doesn't feel like there's enough. But then if you run through the mode as Mr. Knight, you get his two guns, and so the two guns are faster.
Right.
So that did make that mode less bad. I don't. God, this was just such a terrible game. And I don't get but there is the last level of it is they do add you. They had a curveball on the second to last level, the penultimate level, where you get moths that you can like step on, because that's all that they do. And then on the last level they shoot lasers at you.
What?
Yeah, they shoot lasers out of the wall at you.
There's a seeker drone thing. There's a seeker drone thing. It's just firing a laser in the middle of the room. You can literally stand in the corner and you'll dodge it.
Nice, good stuff.
Yeah.
Christ, Steve, what did you make of Roach Mode? A mode that you thought I was kidding about when I mentioned it the first time.
Yeah, no, it's just speedrunning carpal tunnel, isn't it? You just stand in the corner and press the fire button until you win. You know, scanning the room. I could make something more compelling in Doom Builder, and I'm not exactly what you call a seasoned game dev, ladies and gentlemen. You just shoot bugs on a wall, and obviously because we're all playing the console version without a light gun, we're just mashing the X button on the thing over and over until everything dies. It's, the challenge would be to not become bored, let's be honest. Getting to stage 5, the final stage, and realizing, oh, there's now a threat in the room, and then realizing I can just stand to the corner and hammer it through, and like, maybe I'll get a secret file at the end of this. No, you just unlock an infinite ammo assault rifle for this very mode, or something. It was something to that effect.
Continue to shoot roaches.
Yeah, I genuinely think this is rock bottom. This has got to be like there is no under this in terms of Resident Evil video game mode that is just pure unadulterated liquid facile shit. Like, I apologize for expletives on the podcast, but my God, this is easily the thing I have ever played. And I tell you, I have played Umbrella Corps, I have played Operation Raccoon City, I have played Dark Side Chronicles and all its wobbly glory. This is the bottom. There is nothing below this, okay? RE-verse is a masterclass compared to this. I apologise. If there's a swear jar at First Aid Spray, I'm filling it, because this is the pits. This is... no, I cannot forgive this. Like, as someone who has played many a light gun game by Namco, for example, Time Crisis, you know, that had the decency in its console port to throw in a second adventure mode that had different routes and things. Okay, Point Blank, you know, WarioWare with a gun, fantastic time. What on God's green earth is this? Oh,
Do we blame this on Claire as well? Is this also in her dream? You're just dreaming of rooms full of roaches.
Is this also got lore to it? Internet diehards obsessed with the fact that Nemesis was not on Rockfort Island. Like, Jesus. Jeez.
The second hottest thing on the planet.
The PS2, right? The PS2 in 2001
Yeah.
is a masterclass of a machine. Just play Time Splitters 1. Just go back and play that. Just anything. But verse Roach Mode.
Slap that on the box. 9,000 games on this platform, and you chose this.
I'd rather play the PlayStation 2 BIOS than this and just look at my memory card, to be honest.
Just ASMR and vibe out to the towers. I can get behind
Hell
that.
yeah. Right, let's hit a last few couple of things, sort of just broadly speaking, about visuals. First of all, what did we think of the way that the game looks? I mentioned already the UI. I guess that comes into this as well. Again, just to reiterate, it's horrible, very bright, just no effort made to stylize it in any way and make it feel like it belongs part of the game. It's just a bright, colourful few blobs on top of the screen. It takes up too much of the screen as well. It's just horrible stuff, but yeah, what do we think of the way that it looked? Steve, let's start with you. What do you think?
We've already mentioned how the map is virtually unreadable in the middle of a firefight at a weird angle, right?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, the UI, as I said earlier, is absolutely terrible, and it's the visual parity is closer to the original Dreamcast version. I noticed the zombies look a little bit lower quality than they do in CVX. Again, there are better looking light gun games that predate this. This is only going the mobility as a factor. Visually, it's just Code Veronica, just blurrier.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to critique it too much because it is asset reuse. But the thing for me that I just kind of stood out is when the reuse, when it's reuse stuff, it's kind of fine. You know, it's all right. It is what it is. When it's new stuff, it somehow is worse, which is very damning. And the menus and stuff like that are really bad, really bland, and just very uninteresting, and just nothing to it. Again, I don't want to harp on the made in a day gag, but it does feel like some of this was thrown together as quickly as possible. Jordan, what do you make of the visuals of the game?
It's never really a good idea to take third-person assets and put them into a first-person game because you're not improving anything about the fidelity, and so you're just seeing all of the ugliness of those kind of smearing textures that would otherwise it wouldn't matter because, quite frankly, the camera's drawn out too far in the original Code Veronica for any of those details to really kind of show up. But like even with Survivor 1 having sort of like, you know, PS1 asset reuse, there was at least a degree of charm to that. It kind of at least worked. It doesn't really work here. It is just very blurry. It just looks very basic. It looks very unfinished. I mean, at points, it almost looked like an N64 game. The N64 first-person shooter, in just how basic the environments were. And I know, obviously, a lot of these environments were literally just picked up from the Dreamcast Code Veronica and dropped in. But even still, like, they're very pared back and just clearly not meant for a camera to be getting up that close all the time. It's a very drab-looking game. There's absolutely nowhere that stands out. And again, that's another kind of insult to Code Veronica because it at least had quite a few different sort of like interesting locations and stuff like that. None of that survives in this game. Even if it's there, it doesn't feel like it's there, and it's really not worth paying attention to. So it's pretty awful, and it's matched with that pretty naff UI, which obviously was done by a very passionate graphic designer. I feel like this period of games was still kind of making it permissible to have, the real screw it kind of UI that has been done in MS Paint. But as Steve points out, there had been games before this that had better presentation. This didn't really have an excuse, especially coming from Capcom and Namco. They really should know better.
Yeah. Bergs, any thoughts on the way the game looks?
Gosh, for a game that uses assets from two generations, it certainly looks like a very bad PS2 game. And even the PS1 assets look even worse than they did in the PS1, as Steve pointed out earlier in the podcast. This is the sort of thing that reeks to me of a fan project. I know better, obviously.
Right. Sure.
But like this seems like something that some person on Unity would crack together for a game jam over the course of a weekend with like two of their friends. And if this, like hearing that Shinji Mikami is in this, like as a supervisor, that Shinji Mikami like was part of this game is so upsetting.
He's probably just signed on a paper once to say, yeah, that's fine.
Right.
Say in 2001, he's busy making Remake 1. He's not doing this. He's out at the bar celebrating Crimson Heads and stuff. He's
Yeah, it's true.
So, like, with all that said, I I have very few kind things left to say about this experience. This is the reason I got my PS2 emulator working again, and might be the reason I deleted it once more. Actually, I'm not going to at this point since I still have. Like, there's other games we can play. We've played Outbreak a little bit from time to time, which is better than this. So
Infinitely so. I have one note that's just kind of like going spare here. It doesn't necessarily go into visuals, but it's worth chucking in that I just wanted to mention what's really funny about, obviously, classic piece of Resident Evil trivia is, the loading screens, the doors, secret loading screens. It amps up tension, but it lets the game load in the background. Everyone knows that about Resident Evil, and it's an iconic feature of the series, and we always love to see it come back. Of course, it's in this game. What's really funny about this game is that the door animation plays, and you also still get loading between rooms. The door loading screens aren't long enough to load the game. Something about that just seemed like an extra little bit of like, yeah, of course that's the case, on top of all the other issues with this game. Speaking of the aesthetics, though, let's go to the audio side of things. Bergs, I'm going to cue you up first. What did you think of the sounds of Survivor 2? Like we said, no voice acting to speak of.
No voice acting to
music
speak
and sound
of.
effects.
I mean, bad.
Okay.
Sound effects were. It felt like they were given all the assets for stuff, and then
sure,
were told to play with it. I'm blanking on soundtrack right now. Granted, I wasn't really paying attention to it when I was playing it, and I'll own that. Like,
That's
I was
fair.
too busy chatting with friends while I was playing to really focus on the sounds. And it sounded like a Resident Evil game. The zombies sounded right when they came through. The dogs sounded right when they came through. The guns sounded right when you fired them. But in terms of the music, I'll admit that I spaced on it. I didn't even clock any. And it was the music from Code Veronica.
Well, I mean, to be fair, in its defense, then at least it wasn't so shockingly bad that you were like, "Hang on, everyone, I just need to hear what the hell's going on here." It was no mansion basement theme. Some of it is music reused from Code Veronica. I think a decent amount of it, or at least some of it. It's hard to get an exact number on these kind of things without trying to pair them up. Is original though. For my take, this is one of the best parts of the game for what it's worth, because those new pieces of music do fit in. Some of them are remixes, I think, but otherwise they fit in with the game's style. It feels like it should be part of this sort of action-heavy and particularly, pacey, time-limited game. And even more so, it fits in with Code Veronica, some of the stuff. I was genuinely surprised. I don't know who did the soundtrack for this. Maybe I'll look it up now while someone else talks. I don't know if it's the same people, but I was pleasantly surprised with how it did feel like some of the new stuff. I was like, this could have been in Code Veronica. Probably one of the better parts of it for me. Steve, what did you make of the audio?
See, I thought it all was from Code Veronica. That's how convinced I was. I think like some of its battle mode stuff that's been like shunted over.
That might be the case.
I didn't realise there was like unique to this game anything besides maybe the end screen with the little Harrier jet. Like, I hate to use the words asset flippy, but it generally feels like if you liked the music in Code Veronica and the sound effect use in Code Veronica, it still, for me, sounds the same kind of like weirdly muted as it is in that. Consistent. Like, if someone had told me this was in fact like disc 2 of Code Veronica, here's your bonus modes, I'd believe it. That's how much of it does sound like and behave like, at least on an audio standpoint. I honestly, I thought it was, if you like Code Veronica, you'll at least like how it sounds. That being said, I don't think Alexia even gets her theme, does she? It's just the generic boss theme.
Yeah, I don't believe so. I think I'm fairly certain there is some new stuff in this, but if nothing else, there isn't this many sort of high sort of stakes, high-paced, high-energy music in Code Veronica enough to fill out an entire soundtrack's worth. So that's, I mean, if that is the case, it's cool. I can't find any information on who composed it, unfortunately. I'll keep looking. But Jordan, any thoughts on the audio of the game?
Yeah, I mean, the music was all right. I was not so keen on it in the actual campaign because it's pretty much all the same kind of music. It's kind of, up-tempo, action, chase kind of music and that, which obviously Resident Evil has, but we're very, very much used to it being sort of digestible with a variety of other music styles that's sort of going on to kind of match the mood and the environments that you're sort of going through over the course of the adventure. And because obviously the whole campaign is just one big action running, gunning scene, it's obviously doesn't have any of that variety. So it's kind of missing in that way. For what it's worth, I did like a couple of tracks that were sort of, tucked away in things like the secret reports. I was going to assume that they were from other games because I thought that was probably the case for most of the content. When you do actually look up the soundtrack for this game on, say, YouTube and stuff like that, there's a lot of tracks. There's like 30, close to 40 tracks, and it's like, I don't even know if I heard all of these. I don't know, there might be some, extra super duper secret mode where all of this music shows up when, I don't know, you get to play as the cockroach. But otherwise, I don't know where it was showing up or if I even experienced it. It all kind of ended up blending together a bit, which is a bit of a shame because if some of this music is in fact from Code Veronica, which, is a game worthy of discussion and merit and interest, then I don't want to necessarily sort of talk it down, but it just didn't necessarily kind of rubbed me the right way, really. But I mean, at least, like the voice acting was very good because this is the first game that was actually that they hired mimes for all of the voice acting roles, and I thought they were impeccable. There was not a single sound. I couldn't hear them, but I could very clearly see that they were driving around in an invisible car. So good for them. But to be fair, that dialogue is so awful that if you had actually called in the actors to recite that kind of stuff, they may never work for you again because what was it? So, yeah, maybe the less sound, the better in that kind of regard.
The composer for Survivor 2 Code Veronica was Hiroshi Igarashi, who didn't work on Code Veronica, the original game. The only problem with Googling this person is that it's very unclear because there is a Hiroshi Igarashi who was a composer and worked on a few animes and stuff, but also the IMDb for Hiroshi Igarashi lists him as a planner for Namco for this game, on the Namco side of things, not a composer. No reason that he didn't do both. Absolutely, possibly, likely during this time period in gaming. So maybe it's him. But I did think that was particularly interesting because he's also credited as the map designer on Pokemon Ranger and the game designer on Detective Pikachu. It's a weird career.
Wow.
And
obviously, if he did in fact do the soundtrack for this game and it's all mostly original music, there's definitely some stuff from Code Veronica. That's kind of crazy because I don't even think it's unfair to say that if that is his contribution, that's probably more than anybody else that worked on this game. because almost everything else was lifted from somewhere else. So,
Speaking of which, the last sort of header before we get to our conclusions. Usually when we sort of break down games like this and we get into real specific details, we have a characters heading. I'm going to strike that from the record because I don't think there's anything to say in terms of characters other than most of them are missing. But I do have a BOW section. So if anybody has any thoughts on the selection of BOWs available in this game, Steve mentioned it earlier. Whilst I'm grumpy about Nemesis being here for no reason, it's because he's a unique monster and he's tied so heavily to RE3. Drained Emos, not so much. Sure, it only appears in RE3, but there's no reason that it can't be elsewhere. And it is nice to see it in another game. This is its only other appearance that I know of outside of the remake, where it's a different kind of beast, really. So to have the Drained Emos kind of drop through a ceiling or whatever it was in this game was a really pleasant surprise for an RE nerd. As one of these sort of unsung creatures. The liquor being included too is obviously cool, and at this point I don't think the liquor was really as overplayed as it is now in terms of the series being shoehorned into everything. But I really like this as kind of like, it's fun that it has the demos in it, but that's my general take on the BOWs. It's worth kind of shouting that out, but if anybody has any more thoughts on BOWs, Bergs, any thoughts on the monsters in the game?
No, the Drain Demons being in it was pretty cool. Yeah, sorry.
There. Yeah, all good. Steve, any thoughts on BOWs?
You can shoot bats.
You can shoot bats.
I don't think it's a great thing. It's just like that. There's not even any indication that a BOW. You can blast bats for the heck of it. The only thing I can notice in this game, comparing it specifically to Survivor, is that the lickers behave more like they should. If that makes any sense. In Survivor, they do their big flying leap, but it'd be in slow motion, whereas in this, they're a bit nippier, a bit more threatening. Also, no idea why they're on the island. I guess they got the same bus to Drain Demos. Just thought, let's just rock up, lads. Let's have some fun. It's nice to see them. Sense it makes none, but at least they're there. Makes more sense than Nemesis because Claire never met either of them. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Hunters. The sweepers seem almost luminescent in this, and they literally just made one bigger as a boss fight. Bit of a misstep. They used the giant spider twice, which is unforgivable. They could have used a different BOW from the same game. You could even have Monster Steve. It was a dream. Who gives a frig,
Yeah, it's true.
That
hasn't happened
passable.
yet, Steve.
That's it.
Yeah. Jordan, any thoughts on the BOWs?
First of all, I like that when you shoot the spiders enough, sometimes you can shoot their abdomen off, and then they're just a bunch of legs running around for a little bit longer. Yeah, I'm sure that was definitely meant to happen. It's a fun run of sort of cameos of enemies from across the series, so that was kind of nice. Where you're running around and you're kind of like, oh, it's this creature from this game and this creature from this game and all that kind of stuff. But. And it's the same deal with the bosses as well. I think what really lets this down is the fact that the game simply is not capable of making these interesting to fight.
Yeah.
Because either it obviously wants you to play it like a Lycan game, in which case you're just, making sure that you're shooting them fast enough on the screen. But obviously once you've got the auto-aim factored in, you don't have to change your tactics at all. You just stand there and shoot and maybe step back a bit every now and then. Like, there's quite a different variety of enemies. There's some which obviously crawl on the ceiling or crawl on the floor or fly around like the bats and stuff like that. But it doesn't matter. As long as you're facing it, you just pull the trigger and the game does the rest. So there's absolutely... Even though there's actually, like, physically in front of you, there's variety of enemies. They all play the same way. A couple of them might rush you. The Bandersnatch, okay, to be fair, does reach out and grab you, but there's just so little sort of redeeming variety to actually how they play that it wasn't worth it in the end, I think. For what it's worth, something that did kind of stand out, and I've thought long and hard about this because I didn't know if it was just the game messing up or if this was actually intended as a design. I think there's certain zombies that just combust into flames.
They have red eyes.
Yeah. I didn't understand that. And I guess I don't have to anymore because the show's almost over. But still, like that was something of note. But almost everything was the same deal. It was kind of like it doesn't really matter how they're trying to fight you. because you only have one way to fight them, and it's not very interesting. And so the BOWs, despite their variety, aren't really interesting either. So another shame.
Very good point. Okay, let's kind of give our conclusions on how we feel about Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. See who's got the best take on this one, I guess. I'm just going to do mine real quick. I think it's very funny. I also looked up the soundtrack for this game, and I was very amused by someone in the comments of one of the YouTube uploads of the soundtrack. We make fun of the fact, Steve very much so, that everyone calls Code Veronica underrated, so much so that it can't be underrated anymore because everyone rates it. It was really funny to see someone call Survivor 2 underrated, of all things.
Oh, God. No. No, this is...
If anything, it's underhated.
Yeah.
Precisely. Yeah, I mean, it's not underrated at all. If you got nostalgia for this, I almost feel sorry for you, to be honest. I'm with Steve. This is the worst. This is on par with Umbrella Corps, or worse. I've been saying it forever. Just from looking at the damn thing and playing it, it was somehow even worse. So yes, to tie a bow on how I started the episode, talking about spending £80 on a copy of it to complete my RE collection, I asked, was it worth it? What do you think? Bergs, what's your final thoughts on Survivor 2?
Sorry, it probably didn't come through, but I made a raspberry sound. Ultimately speaking, my favorite part about Resident Evil Gun Survivor 2 Code Veronica, the arcade game experience, was talking about it with you people.
That's good. Oh, I'm glad you said that. That's nice.
Yeah.
Jordan, final thoughts on Survivor 2?
I didn't hate my time with the game, but I'm doing it for this show, so it was at least I knew that there was going to be some fun dissection of it afterwards. If I had bought this game as a kid, I would have been actually scarred by it, especially if I'd bought a gun con to go with it. It just it under-delivers on absolutely everything that it could possibly promise, which is not much. It comes off as a massive compromise. I would love to know what the background of this game is, but I'm going to assume that we're talking about weeks of development at most, and this seemingly just being something that probably Capcom and Namco both collectively forgot was even supposed to be made, and then they made it very quickly, and Namco obviously especially had to go out and make hardware for it, which now doesn't even probably work anymore. So it's all kind of it just feels like a big waste of resources, and there wasn't even that many resources to waste since there's so much asset reuse. You don't have to play this game. I can say that with absolute confidence. You can watch it on YouTube, but even then you're probably going to want to watch it from a safe distance because there's really not much that you can take from this and say, yeah, it's good, but I don't know. Somehow I still found fun in it, but I suppose it's because it's not very long and I knew I'd never have to play it again.
And Steve, what's your conclusion on Survivor 2?
Okay, we all know it's toilet. Let's not beat around the bush. It's dire. It's very awful. But I want to speak to you, that one member of the audience who is literally a die-hard Code Veronica fan. Just don't. Just don't. Just look. If you love Code Veronica that much, go play the battle mode. Unlock the first-person view. You will have a better time. For everyone else, just burn it. Just salt the earth, scatter the ashes. I am talking about this game with you guys. It's always fun. All right, that is an experience I relish. But please, can we play better games than this? Well, at least I know there are better games than this because this is Resident Evil Gun Survivor 2 Code Veronica. The only way is up.
Absolutely. And it's just the case that we are now 94 episodes into the podcast where I have tried to balance our coverage so that we don't do all the good games first and leave all the bad games to the end. But inevitably it's happened to some degree, which is why we've done Vendetta and then this. But I promise there is some fun and positive episodes to come in the remainder of this season. providing we don't get a Shadow Drop Resident Evil 9 that kind of changes the plans. We've at least got some slightly more fun stuff to come. But nothing else remains for me but to thank the panel, our contributors, and our community. Join us on the First Aid Spray Discord server to hear the show early, and check out our merch store or our Patreon to support the show. Don't forget that these and our social media links can be found at faspraypod.com. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all good podcasting apps. And if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review where you can and spread the good word, including, as I found out recently, Spotify comments. You can leave a comment on an individual episode of a podcast now. It's really cool. Thank you to everyone who's left comments. We've collectively really enjoyed reading them. In the next episode, we'll be staying in Rockfort to get our training and then heading out with the USS as we return to the Profile series for a unique edition as we cover the mysterious Hunk and the variations on the Fourth Survivor minigame. Thank you to the panel. You can follow us all individually on Blue Sky. I'm at CyWhite, Steve is at FB Steve, Berger is at Biblically Correct, and Jordan is at CerealBox64. And finally, thank you for listening and have a good week.
Get ready to grumble.
Let's get ready to rant.
Do we have to?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Get out of the way.
Yes.
Rip it off like a Band-Aid.